almost 15 to 3 KNYO Fort Bragg. Ezekiel Kralin has been sending me installments of a very long story about two dogs that he loves, Flacco and Lucky. And I said crackhead, and he wrote that it isn't a crackhead, it's a meth head, and there's a total difference there, but I don't know what the difference is. So meth head then. A meth head who is the owner of the dogs, because Ezekiel isn't allowed to keep the dogs in his apartment, and the meth head is homeless, and Ezekiel is held in his servitude and has to give him money and keep doing nice things for him in order to make sure that the dogs get taken care of, and it's becoming tedious. You Must Lie to Live is the title of this installment. Ezekiel Kralin wrote. Email correspondence January 7th and 8th. Subject, last night's meetup, Loverly, Part 1 continued. Date, January 7, nighttime. Your life is much better than you realize. You are doing so well. I've never met anyone like you who not just survives on the streets but thrives, so I'm not worried about you, just about these dogs. I then pet them both and continued. For they are a tremendous responsibility you have added to your burdens. They are a great blessing in your life, and just appreciating and loving them more than you already do will work wonders you can't even imagine right now. They are never a burden. They never will be a burden, yet sometimes you treat them that way. It is you who needs to snap out of that attitude and always regard them as the best thing that ever happened to you, because it's flat out true. They give you so much love and kindness and burst with pride 24/7 to be your very best friends forever. Heck, they'd die for you in the blink of an eye if that was necessary. Now, please keep in mind I didn't speak in the organized run-on fashion like above, but made my points in chunks between his thoughtful interjections and in less fancy words so he could better comprehend, though I suspect most of what I told him went over his head. But at least he actually gave me the space and time to speak at length on important matters that would benefit him. For most of our conversation, I also pet and held the doggies, scritched their bellies, and tucked them into the sleeping bag. Deke also brought up the difficulties of trying to get a roof over his head while other vagrants didn't have it so hard. He said that Homeless Outreach asked him questions like, is he a drug addict, or has he ever had to resort to prostitution while living on the streets, for food, a place to crash, or whatever. Why should I lie to be eligible for housing, he queried. If I can't be honest, I'd rather stay on the streets. I explained to him that sometimes you have to lie, whether it's to get off the streets or even find employment. It's part of the game. For example, I told him that when I was being reevaluated for SSI, I had to take an ink blot test. But I already knew what things to claim to see in the blots that would qualify me to keep receiving my stipend. If you see monsters, aliens, or creepy insects, I explained, instead of houses, butterflies, and other nice things, they will label you mentally disturbed. So that's all I told them I saw in each ink blot, something horrific or icky. So it would be best, I continued, if you told them, yes, you have had sex against your wishes for food, drugs, etc. None of their business, you never did that, and it will put you higher up on their list. Look, Deke, sometimes you even have to lie to get the job you want. He shrugged his shoulders. Nah, I don't want to lie. So does that mean you told them you smoke meth? I asked, because that's the truth, and it would also make you more eligible. No, I didn't, he replied. Right, because it's none of their business, I retorted with a chuckle. The incredible aspect of my philosophy is that this also makes the person I'm currently explaining this to one of my opposing forces, for Deke is certainly that, if nothing else, so I'd better practice what I preach, since I just told him to not get caught up in anger or any other sour emotion whenever things don't go his way. For his frequent defiance challenges me to find a path towards a winning outcome for all parties involved, and that includes the pups. Though, as I've conjectured before, if he is indeed a bodhisattva guardian, then all the challenges he presents are precisely planned, timed, and calculated, from losing the money I might have just given him to his absurd hissy fits and fabrications, and all the way up to his less-than-full loving care of the Brindlekin. In other words, it's all an act, carefully scripted to put me through my paces, for my benefit, not his, and to make me into a hero. Part 2 of last night's meetup continued tomorrow. I need my rest. Subject, last night's meetup. Loverly, Part 2, date January 8th. Our conversation wasn't just about housing rights, as Deke grumbled about all the, quote, lazy Arabs and Mexicans here. For example, quote, I see Mexicans standing around their homes laughing and guzzling beer, he remarked. They don't work, but they still get a place to live. That's not true, Deke, I replied. So what's wrong with them kicking back now and then after spending all day as restaurant cooks, crop pickers, maintenance men, and house cleaners? They work very hard and live in crowded conditions because rent is astronomically high. So you see them hanging out after work, no big deal. Did it ever occur to you they put food on America's table because they're the ones who work on the farms to gather our crops and cut and package all our meat? That's backbreaking labor most Americans refuse to do. Around that time, this young fellow came along and offered us some food in a white cardboard container. Turned out to be 2 large slices of cheese pizza with anchovies. Deke offered me a slice, but I said, no thanks, not hungry. A short time later, Deke told me to bring him another sleeping bag. What happened to the one I gave you yesterday? I asked. I left it in my tent, he replied. Well, that's good to know, Watson, if true, that he may have actually gotten my pop-up tent properly set up. Maybe he's camping with other vagrants, and one of them is familiar with the Teton brand and helped. Nonetheless, I told him I can't be giving him a sleeping bag every time I turn around. I get a good deal on them, $20 a pop, I remarked, but still, it adds up. Never mind then, he scowled. Forget I even mentioned it. Sorry I asked. No, that's okay. I'll bring another one down, I replied. Just bring back the one you already have. Don't dump it when it gets soggy. But I already do that, he whined. For the most part, yes, I agreed, but you didn't bother to return the one I gave you several days back, but I gave you a new one anyway. So I trudged on upstairs once more, brought down yet another sleeping bag, still tightly rolled in its packaging, and tossed it into the cart. But since he didn't suggest I let the pooches lie down on it, I did it myself, took the bag from the cart, walked over to him on the opposite side where the dogs sat. As I crouched down and began to open the package, Flacco clambered over his legs and began sniffing at the bag, eager to enjoy the comfort she knew was coming her way. So as not to disturb her master, I moved to the other side where the cardboard was already set down and finished unrolling the sleeping bag. Tricky to accomplish that, as both doggies were already attempting to plunk themselves on it. So I placed it down still unzipped, and Flacco immediately flopped on her back and began to madly writhe all over it, sliding the bag off the cardboard with her and toward the curb, flipping her head back and forth with tongue hanging out and forelegs waving in the air. "Whoa, girl!" I exclaimed, and pulled the bag back into place upon the cardboard sheet while Flacco continued to wiggle in doggy bliss like there's no tomorrow. "She didn't used to do that," I said to Deke while scritching her belly. "That was always Lucky's shtick. She only started squirming on her back several months ago after realizing how much attention Lucky gets for doing that. So she decided she wants some of that action, too. Now she doesn't even wait for Lucky to do it first. She just dives right in. Lucky's a good brother," I continued. "He taught her how to play fight, too. At first she was offended whenever he grabbed her tail and pulled on it, but after some months she began to do the same to him. Nowadays she's just likely to start a tussle as her brother, and do you notice? When she pushes him aside to hog up all the hugs, Lucky starts massaging her shoulders with his teeth, which makes her stand still in pleasure so I can then hug and pet them both, and how he'll step aside if she goes for his own food bowl rather than put up a fight." Instead of Deke's usual cutting me off and making snarky retorts to my praise of the pups, he spoke not a word, but before returning hovel, I managed to fully unzip the sleeping bag with the mutts atop, after which I was able to toss a generous part of it over them to keep them snug and warm. I later observed another vagrant had joined Deke and sat a few feet from him, and they began to engage in whatever badinage suits their kind. He was clothed in a black knit watch cap, a double layer of sweatshirts, baggy old jeans, frayed sneakers, and a heavy jacket sporting the image of a football helmet and the logo SF49ers in its trademark colors of red, black, and ruddy gold. I've always found those ubiquitous Bay Area jackets gaudy and cheap-looking, while football is a stupid sport anyway. At another point, when I poked my head out the window, Flacco looked right up at me. She sat immediately below, beside her master. I didn't even make a sound, so how did she know? Doggy telepathy? We certainly have a connection. Funny thing is, Deke also noticed her looking straight up, stuck in that position, an unusual pose for most dogs. So he did the same, as in what the fuck, to see me smiling down. He waved me away with an annoyed look, but I ignored him and continued to gaze down at Flaco until she finally looked away, about a half-minute later. Sometime after that, another homeless dude showed up, tall, lanky, dishwater blonde, and carrying a Japanese folding bed in a black cover. He set the Japanese folding bed, still folded, against the lamppost to make a comfy backrest, then gathered up 2 sheets of cardboard from the bin nearby, and sat down. He seemed a friendly type, but Deke didn't engage him in small talk. Scampy also showed up, as well as Heimdall with his own latest speaker. It was his jazz music floating up to my window that caught my curiosity, wondering if it was him. I thought to come downstairs to greet the indigent Viking, but decided to remain inside and enjoy the fact that Deke had company through most of his visit. Shortly before returning Deke's smartphone and speaker, I found a large folding shopping cart, extra wide, on the back porch. Perfect for the JBL Party Box 300, I thought. A nice fit with room to spare and much easier to port down the stairs. I later learned, because I brought it down to him separately this first time. Just when I was figuring out how to secure the speaker to the small aluminum dolly stored on my loft, here comes the perfect carrier to save the day. He was very pleased with the folding cart. A rare moment when he didn't invent another reason to complain. But he nonetheless told me to just set the speaker on the sidewalk instead of placing it in the cart. I wished him and Hounds a good night, but at the last moment Deke asked if I could fix a meal for the dogs. "Why didn't you ask me earlier?" I queried, for I was growing tired and eager to hit the sack since it was approaching midnight. "It didn't occur to me," he said. "It's okay, don't bother." No, I replied, glad to feed 'em. Just give me a minute. After bringing the dogs their late meal, Deke suddenly griped about a hairline crack in his smartphone. "It wasn't there before I handed it to you." I approached him then, bent over his shoulder where he sat, squinted a few seconds, and said, "I don't see any crack." "You're old, your sight's bad, that's why," he snarked. By then, Flaco and Lucky had finished eating, so I picked up the empty bowls and, before stepping inside, took a closer look at his smartphone. "Oh, I see it now," I exclaimed. "I assure you I didn't drop it, bang it, or do anything but be real gentle with your phone. Zach. Besides, you love to come up with one excuse after another to guilt-trip me. You just can't allow me a friendly visit from start to end. There's always something to complain about, eh?" I stood back up then, walked toward the gate, then paused, turned towards him, and added, "These phones are delicate when it comes to the screen. Hairline cracks just happen after a while. Not much you can do about it. Otherwise, it's in great condition thanks to the case you bought for it and the screen protector I provided. You've probably dropped it a whole bunch of times over the weeks, and without that case and protector, it'd be an absolute wreck by now, full of cracks. Yet here you gripe about one hairline fracture." He didn't argue back, but stood up, went to his cart, and pulled out an empty half-gallon jug of Arizona tea. "Could you fill this with water for me?" "Sure," I replied, took it, and returned upstairs. When I brought it down a minute later and handed it to him, he said, "I love you, and thanks for everything you do." "You scare me when you talk like that," I japed, then fondly pet the Brindlekin for the last time that night and returned hovel. I figured when he prepared to leave, he'd place the speaker in that granny cart I found, which had wheels, of course, and could be pulled alongside. Then he could place the sleeping bag inside the shopping cart with the doggies atop. Nope. As I watched him depart from my window, the JBL Party Box 300 was once more stashed aslope within the cart, with the smaller cart folded up and stuck between that and a pile of indecipherable junk, so the canines had to walk beside their master, as always. But it was a nice evening, without a drop of rain for the nonce, so I wasn't too perturbed. A few minutes later, I stepped out to clean up whatever mess remained. Not much at all, just 2 sheets of cardboard and an empty flat box that held the pizza. The lanky blonde was still around, but in the process of moving on too. I saw him pushing around his own cardboard sheets till they reached the curb, upon which he picked up his JFB and walked over toward the trash bin. I decided to pick up his cardboard too and deposit it by that same bin. He noticed and said, "Oh, thanks," and I replied, "No problem, glad to help. By the way, is that your jacket?" I then pointed to the base of the lamppost, where lay a crumpled large fleece jacket in a snazzy shade of blue, and impeccably clean. "No," he replied, "you can have it." "Well, I had my friend's dogs in mind," I explained. "Anything to keep them warm through the cold nights, and that jacket will help. But I really like that jacket, good physician, so decided to keep it for myself. One pocket has a large hole in it, but since it has a zipper, I'll just keep it closed. Here's a picture." Overall, Deke was highly amicable compared to previous meetups, and what gripes he had were minimal. Therefore, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst ever, I'd rate this visit a 9, or maybe an 8, as we need some wiggle room to allow for improvement. But in light of these horrid storms and having to care for the pups through the deluge with more on the way, his behavior was impeccable, so I'll raise him all the way up to 10.